In this video, we're going to find probability using z-scores. It is the case that you can use a z-score to find the associated proportion and probabilities in a normal distribution. So we are going to use what we've used before, this unit normal table. So if you don't have it out now, go ahead and take it out. We can find specific proportions and probabilities for certain z-scores using this unit normal table. Now, just so you know, when we talk about proportions, we're going to be talking about decimals. Proportions are decimals. We've talked about that already. I've also talked about how probabilities in this course are shown as decimals, but they can also be transformed into percentages as well. We tend to talk about them more in percentages, but the unit normal table that you're going to be using uses decimals. And so that's why I want us to get used to using decimals when we're finding these probabilities. This is how it works. What I would like you to do is take out your z table, your unit normal table. Those words are interchangeable. And I want you to find a z of +1. Now you notice there is no plus because the z table is good for minus, good for plus, does not matter. So find a z-score for 1 and go ahead and pause the computer if you need to. Now that you have found z-score of 1 on your unit normal table, let's see what the directions are asking us for in this first problem. We have probability, so we're saying what is the probability of finding a z-score that is greater than 1? We can use the unit normal table to figure this out. So I'm looking for a z-score that's greater than 1. So if I were to draw this out, I would draw the line at a z-score of 1, and I would shade in this area that's greater than 1. So as you look at your z table, what column is that? Is it column B, the body, column C, the tail, or column D, between the mean and z? Well, it's a tail. It's definitely the tail region that we're going to be looking at. So go ahead and look at column C to find this proportion of scores that are greater than a +1. And you'll see we have 0.1587, so that is the probability. The proportion that is greater than 1, and we just multiply this by 100% for interpretation. We say that 15.87% of the scores are greater than a z-score of 1. Let's try another one. This time I'd like you to look at your z table and find a z-score of 1.50. I, in this case, have it as positive 1.50, but your z table doesn't have positive or negative. Just find 1.50. Pause the computer if you need to. So the directions are asking us for the probability of finding a z-score that is less than 1.50. So now we're going in the other direction. We're looking for less than. So the very first thing I would do if I were drawing this out is I would draw the line where a positive 1.50 might be in the normal distribution. Then I think about what is this asking me? It's asking me for everything less than. So I'm going to shade in this area that's less than 1.50. And so this tells me what column I'm going to be looking at. Is it column B, the body, column C, the tail, or column D, between the mean and z? Well, we talked last time about when you have a z-score and you cross over the middle and go all the way to the end, that is column B. This is the body. So this looks like what is in your unit normal table for the body. It's a z-score that starts on one side and encompasses everything to the tail of the other side. And if you look at column B in your unit normal table, you will find 0.9332. That is the probability or the proportion. The probability of choosing a score less than 1.50, or the proportion of scores that are less than 1.50. And for interpretation, we can multiply it by 100 and say there's a 93.32% chance of finding a z-score less than 1.50 in the normal distribution. Let's try this one. We have this time we're looking for a z-score of negative 0.5. Once again, there's no negatives in the z table or the unit normal table. Just look for 0.5. And we're looking for the proportion or the probability of z-scores that are less than 0.50. Okay, so First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw it out. That's what I always do first. And I'm going to put my negative 0.5 here. Maybe a z-score of 1 would, negative 1 would be about here. So I've drawn it out, and I'm looking at what it is asking me. It says everything less than 0.50. So I'm going to shade in this area less than 0.50 right here. So what column are you going to look at in your table? Is this a matter of crossing the body? Well, no, it's on one side to the end. Is it the tail region? Well, yes, it is. This is the tail region. It's a bigger tail, but it's still the tail region. It's still looking at a z-score all the way to the end without crossing the middle. That's the tail. That's column C. So if you look at column C, you find 0.3085. So that means that there is a probability of 0.3085 of selecting one score from this distribution that is less than 0.5. Or we might multiply it by 100 and say that there's a 30.85% chance that you would randomly draw a score less than negative 0.5 in the distribution, a z-score of negative 0.5. So now it's time for a learning check, and what I would like you to do is really pause the computer, try all these on your own. This is the best way that you learn, and then come on back. Look for a z that is the probability of finding a z that is less than 0.1, the probability of finding a z that is greater than 0.8, the probability of finding a z that is less than a negative 0.2, the probability of finding a z that is greater than negative 0.33, and the probability of finding a z that is greater than negative 0.50. So take a stab at those and then come on back. For this first item, we've been asked to find the probability of finding a z-score that is less than a positive 1.00. So we can use the unit normal table to figure this out. But before I do that, I'm going to draw it out. I think it's really important to draw these things out to be able to visualize what it is we're doing. So we know that we're working with a z-score of positive 1.00, and it's right here. So I'm going to draw the line where we have a positive 1.00. Then what is it asking me? It's asking me for the probability of finding a z-score that is less than 1.00. So I'm going to fill in this area that I'm interested in, all the scores less than a positive 1.00. Now that I've done this, I can look at my unit normal table and figure out, is this a column B issue, a column C, or a column D? Well, as you can tell, we had a z-score, it crossed the middle and went to the tail. This is column B for sure. So look at column B, and you'll see that the z-score associated with all the scores less than a positive 1 is 0.8413. So we can say that there's a probability of 0.8413 of finding a z-score in the distribution that is less than a positive 1.00. Sometimes it's just easier to say, though, we have an 84.13% chance of selecting a z-score that is less than a positive 1.00. You can also just simply say that there are 84.13% of the scores in the distribution below 1.00. This next item asks for the probability of finding a z-score that is greater than a positive 0.80. So this time we're looking for a z-score that is more than a positive 0.80. So I've got the distribution drawn out, and a positive 0.80 is almost a positive 1. So I'm going to estimate that positive 0.80 would be about here. And our directions are to find everything greater than that. So I'm going to come over here and shade in all the greater scores. And what column are we going to look at to find the proportion of the scores that are greater than a positive 0.80? Well, this sure looks like the tail, doesn't it? So we're going to look at column C, and we see that the probability of finding a score greater than 0.80 is 0.2119. Or we could interpret it and say there's a 21.19% chance of randomly drawing a z-score that is greater than 0.80 in this distribution. So we used column C because we were just looking at this area in the tail. Let's go on to the next. This next item asked us for the probability of finding a z-score that is less than a negative 2.00. Okay, so our z-table, the unit and orbital table, does not have negative numbers, but it doesn't matter. We can use the z-table for negative 2, positive 2. We just look for 2.00, the z. So we're looking for everything less than a negative 2, so I have to draw this out first. So I'm going to come to negative 2. This is a z of negative 2. And I'm looking for everything less than a negative 2. So there we go. We know exactly what column this is going to be. This is going to be column C because I'm looking for an area in the tail. So a z-score at negative 2.00 for column C gives us a probability of 0.0228. That's really small, isn't it? That's a pretty unusual z-score to be less than a negative 2.00. So we can say that there's a 2.28% chance of finding a z-score of less than negative 2. The next item asks us to find the probability of finding a z-score that is greater than negative 0.33. Have you figured out yet that I am not an artiste? I have so much trouble putting these distributions out, so bear with me. But here we go, a z-score that is greater than negative 0.33. So we have negative 0.33 is about a third of the way between 0 and negative 1, right? So I'm going to put it about there. I don't know if it's quite there, but that's good for estimation purposes. And this is asking me for everything greater than this negative 0.33. So greater, I'm going to go in this direction and fill it in, right? So what column am I going to use here to find the proportion of the scores that are greater than negative 0.33? Well, this is the case where we have a score, it crosses over the mean and goes all the way to the tail. So this is column B. And the column B proportion listed is 0.6293. It's an easier way to say we have 62.93% of the scores are greater than a negative 0.33. This encompasses 62.93%, or the proportion of 0.6293. For this last one, we were asked to find the probability of finding a z-score that is greater than a negative 0.50. So let's map that out. Easy to figure out where a negative 0.50 is. It's somewhere between 0, a mean of 0, and negative 1. So I'm going to put my negative 0.50 about here. It's asking for everything greater, so I'm going to shade in this greater area. All right, so which column are we going to use? Well, it's the same situation as the last one. We have our z-score, which is on one side of the mean. It crosses over the mean and goes to the tail of the other side. This is column B. And if you look at column B, we have 0.6915. So the probability of finding a z-score in the distribution that is greater than negative 0.5 is 0.695, or we can say there's a 69.15% chance of finding a z-score that is greater than negative 0.5 in this distribution, or we can say that 69.15% of the scores are greater than a negative 0.50. So hopefully that gives you some good practice. In the next video, we're going to go backwards. I'm going to give you the proportion, and you're going to find the z-score. It's easy. You've got this.